For all of you guys taking the TOEFL test anytime soon, here it is. I've brought to you the listening section of the TOEFL. End-to-end entire test is presented in this video. Now all you have to do, sit down with a piece of paper, with pen, right, and start working through these questions. At the end you can calculate your score. Everything to calculate your score and the correct answers are already present in the description. For more such videos and latest up-to-date test formats and all these videos which are presented to you on this channel, you can subscribe and you can send a request to me on my Instagram. You can let me know which section you would like to do more and I'll be happy to create more such videos and post them for you. Until then, I'll see you at the end of the video. All the best, and I wish that your test goes very well.
Now, listen to a conversation between a student and a lab assistant.
Hi, how can I help?
Hi, so I need to use a computer, but the other assistant told me I can't right now because the computer lab is full. He said that I have to leave.
Do you have a reservation?
Yes, well, I did.
You did have a reservation? Do you mean you already used your time?
Yeah, I just used the computer for 2 hours, but I have a final project due tomorrow and I'm not done yet. I need to use the computer for another 2 hours.
Okay, the computers are only available for 2 hours. Each student can make a reservation for 2 hours a day. Do you know about the policy?
Yeah.
We have so many students who need to use the computer lab during finals. We have to make sure that everyone has a turn. Can you wait until tomorrow?
No, my project is due tomorrow morning.
Do you have a computer at home you can use?
No, I don't have one.
Okay, I see. Here's what we can do. Are you available this evening?
Yeah.
Great. You can fill out this form to ask for an exception. It's for students who are very close to their project deadline and don't have access to a computer at home. You can ask for a second reservation to use the computer today for another 2 hours.
Okay.
There's a wait list though, so it's not a guarantee. Only if we have a spot open up this evening. We'll email you if we do.
Oh, what if I just come back this evening? Maybe someone will finish early and I can just take their spot?
No, you need to go through our reservation system. It's the only way we can make sure we're being fair to everyone. Sometimes students come in and they try to just take someone else's spot, and that's a problem for everyone. We have had students who got suspended from using the computer lab for 2 days because they used a computer without a reservation.
I don't want that.
No, you don't want that. Listen, I will tell you that there are usually a few students who cancel their reservations, especially in the evening. And there is only one person on the wait list in front of you. So I think you have a good chance.
Okay, that's great. I don't feel so worried about finishing my project now.
Now, answer the question. 1. What are the students and the lab assistant mainly discussing? Two. What is the lab assistant trying to tell the student when she mentions other students who have been suspended? Three. What does the lab assistant suggest that the student do? Four. How does the student likely feel at the end of the conversation? 5. Listen again to the part of the conversation. Why does the lab assistant say this?
Do you have a reservation?
Yes. Well, I did.
You did have a reservation? Do you mean you already used your time?
Now listen to a part of a lecture in an astronomy class.
Okay, today I want to discuss asteroids, how they are formed, where they are located in our solar system, and why. This picks up from where we left off last time, discussing the characteristics of comets. Now, as we talked about, comets are mostly composed of ice, and asteroids, on the other hand, are mostly composed of rock and metals. Comets and asteroids are kind of the leftover junk that resulted from the solar system's formation, about 4.5 billion years ago. Comets and asteroids usually form in different parts of the solar system for different reasons. Now, interestingly, we didn't know for sure how asteroids were formed until about 60 years ago. Scientists used to think that there was an ancient planet in our solar system that exploded, for unknown reasons. And when it did, its remnants remained in orbit around the Sun and formed what we know today as the main asteroid belt. This belt is located between Jupiter and Mars. Most asteroids in our solar system are found in this belt, and this fact seemed to confirm that the planetary explosion theory had some merit. But actually, if taken all together, the asteroids in this belt would still not even come close to the size of the Earth, hardly enough to have formed a full planet at one time. Also, some asteroids exist elsewhere in the solar system, and scientists were unable to explain how they got there using the planetary explosion theory, so they had to look for a different explanation. And they found one. It's called the nebular hypothesis. According to this hypothesis, our solar system began as a collection of gases and dust. These materials had mass and therefore exerted a gravitational pull, like all materials do. So each small piece of mass was attracted to the others. So they all started slowly moving toward one another, mostly in the center. As more mass entered the center, its gravitational pull became stronger and stronger. Eventually, enough mass collected there that the sun was born. However, not all matter made it to the center. The rest of it collected in a circular disk, more attracted, by gravity, to other pieces of matter in the disk itself than to the sun, because these other pieces of matter were so much closer. From this disk, all of the planets, moons, and other objects in the solar system were formed, including asteroids and comets. The planets and moons represent the larger collections of matter, and the asteroids and comets are the smaller collections of matter. Now, why did some of these pieces of matter form larger collections and eventually become planets, while others remained separate asteroids? The answer mostly has to do with two factors: proximity to the sun and the gravitational pull from larger bodies, the planets, in the solar system. First, proximity to the sun. Any collection of material that is close enough to the sun cannot remain an independent object for terribly long. Either it will collide with and become absorbed by one of the innermost planets, Mercury, Venus, the Earth, or Mars, or it will be sucked into the gravitational pull of the sun. But does anyone remember what is the next planet in the solar system after Mars?
Isn't it Jupiter?
Yep, it's Jupiter. And what do we know about Jupiter?
Oh, it's the biggest planet.
Thank you. That is correct. So, because Jupiter is so much bigger than other planets, it exerts a much stronger gravitational pull than anything in the solar system besides the sun. Any material that is located between Jupiter and Mars is going to experience a strong gravitational pull from both Jupiter and from the sun and inner planets. The pull from Jupiter is so strong, in fact, that it makes it really hard for these smaller collections of material to combine with one another. They're just traveling too fast. So they collide and bounce off of one another, rather than sticking to one another. Also, many of these objects have been pulled into Jupiter and become part of that planet. What remains is a bunch of objects that can't combine with one another, haven't yet been sucked into another planet or the sun, and haven't escaped the opposing gravitational forces of Jupiter, the sun, and the inner planets. Hence, the main asteroid belt. Now, it's possible for asteroids to escape from this belt, and they do from time to time. These strays can be found throughout most of the solar system, but they tend to be small. Practically all of our solar system's large asteroids are either found within the main asteroid belt or are considered Trojan asteroids, meaning asteroids that form a cluster and follow Jupiter in its orbit.
Now, answer the question. 1. What is the main topic of this lecture? 2. What explanation does the professor give for why all planets and asteroids have not yet been pulled into the Sun? Three. What does the professor say about Trojan asteroids? Four. According to the professor, what feature of an asteroid generally determines whether it is likely to be absorbed by another planet or the Sun? Five. What are 2 points the professor makes about why the planetary explosion theory is incorrect? Six. Why does the professor say this?
Any collection of material that is close enough to the Sun cannot remain an independent object for terribly long. Either it will collide with and become absorbed by one of the innermost planets, Mercury, Venus, the Earth, or Mars, or it will be sucked into the gravitational pull of the Sun. But does anyone remember what is the next planet in the solar system after Mars?
Isn't it Jupiter?
Yep, it's Jupiter. And what do we know about Jupiter?
Now listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Hi, Professor. I'm sorry to bother you. Do you have a second?
Hey Roberto, what's going on? How's the math history project?
That's actually what I wanted to ask about. It's not going so well right now.
What's going on?
My group asked me to come talk to you. We're having an issue. We've met twice now, but we still haven't managed to pick a topic.
Have you looked at any of the books listed on the syllabus? That's a good way to start generating ideas.
It's actually more like we have too many ideas. 2 of us want to do something about measurements. We were thinking about the trigonometry stuff we went over in class and tying it in with architecture somehow. Like how ancient people planned out their buildings without using technology.
It sounds like that's the one you're more interested in.
Haha, yeah. I had this idea of building like some model pyramids or another historic building or something. Like actually working out the equations.
Interesting, but very technical. What did the other 2 want to do?
They were talking about like doing a biography of Aristotle. It's frustrating because that doesn't even seem like a math project to me, but I can't get them interested in anything mathematical.
Let me see, who was in your group? That'd probably be Eric and Maria who wanted to do the biography, right? That's way over on the history side of things.
You guessed it.
History of math is an interesting class. You know, you can count it as either a history class or a math class. So you get history majors who are more interested in the people and events involved. Then you get math majors or engineers who are more interested in trying to use the math techniques that can cause conflict.
Do you think we should split into 2 groups?
If you really can't work it out, we could talk about it. But there has to be something you can agree on. Do you have any ideas that sort of span both history and math?
We haven't really talked about that. We've just been throwing ideas out and shooting them down. I think we were just coming at it from totally different perspectives.
Okay, so that would be one place to start. See if you can enlist everybody this time and brainstorm ideas that use both history and mathematics. That typically makes for a more interesting project.
I'm just worried that we won't come up with something in time. We've already wasted a lot of time arguing about it.
Well, normally you'd want a very specific topic to make the project easier to research. But your group, if you can't come up with something else, you might do better with a slightly broader topic. Take what your group members were talking about, the biography of Aristotle. Maybe Eric and Maria could focus on something more biographical, and you and Riley could focus more on his actual mathematical work. Then you come together and examine how the two affected each other.
Okay, that could work.
The most important thing is to acknowledge all of your different perspectives. You each have special expertise. Try to create a project that uses all of your interests and abilities.
1. What do the speakers primarily discuss? Two. Why does the professor mention that history of math counts as both a history class and a math class? Three. What is the professor's opinion of the group's current project ideas? Four. What does the professor imply about the members of the students' group? Five. According to the professor, which of the following might help the students choose a good project topic? Now listen to a part of a lecture in a journalism class.
It's amazing to think that 20 years ago, cell phones and the internet barely existed. At least, not in the forms that today practically all of us use daily. These technologies have radically changed how many businesses and industries operate. But so far, probably no industry has been more affected than the news industry, and no profession more impacted than journalism. So, well, let me ask you, as journalism students, how do you think the news industry and journalism have been affected? What changes have we seen? Andrew?
Well, for one thing, I don't read the newspaper anymore, and I don't know many people who do.
You don't read the newspaper? Okay, well, you're not alone. But newspapers still have an important role to play, don't you think?
Well, I mean, I guess one of the valuable things newspapers do is go in-depth on an issue in ways that you won't find on social media or blogs.
Yes. In fact, the value provided by newspapers and their reporting staffs has shifted away from being the source of fast information and towards being the source of in-depth analytical information. Nowadays, when an important event happens, well, you can often find out highlights of the story in minutes. Most newspapers still only come out once a day. But the reporters are still there. And as journalists, your responsibility will still be to investigate issues thoroughly, sift through reams of first-hand accounts, confirm facts, and, well, dive into the real issues behind any story. That aspect of journalism has not changed. I would argue that, if anything, the role of the journalist in properly informing the reader has increased in the digital information age, because there's so much more information out there, but less fact-checking, and also less distillation. Yes, Jennifer?
It seems like that's not the only major change. I mean, sure, there's a lot more information out there, and when there's confusion, it's important for people to have journalists they can trust to do fact-checking, find out the important details and reasons for major events, get the big picture of what's actually going on. But isn't the fact that there's so much more information out there also a big change for the journalists too? I mean, can't they now use information from blogs and social media and chat rooms, things like that, to make their job easier?
Excellent point. As a journalist, you have a lot more information available, and that can speed up researching a story or provide insight for new angles in a story. But this can lead to other problems. There's a danger of trying to keep up with the information coming out on the internet, or from competitors, at the cost of journalistic integrity. Here's an example. Do you remember a few years ago when there was that shooting at Fort Hood? The United States Army base? Well, the mainstream media got in some trouble there. Someone claimed on a social media site that the shooter was linked to terrorism, and the major news outlets ran with this idea. The problem is, it turned out to be completely false. So racing to be the first to report the breaking story, everyone got their facts wrong, and it really damaged the public's trust in major news outlets. As journalists, you have to remember how important it is to verify facts before reporting them. And in this case, a lot of professional reporters ended up looking bad.
Professor Duke, when you said newspapers are becoming more of the source of in-depth analytical information, how can newspaper companies afford to keep paying for investigative journalism and research and all that when newspaper readership is dropping?
Oh, well, you're right. This is a serious problem. And different newspapers are trying to handle this problem in different ways. Make no mistake, the business model for newspaper companies has changed in the digital age. It had to change. But newspapers cannot afford to get rid of their investigative journalism departments, and they have to be able to hire talented, competent journalists. Society depends on them to get the story right. So, they have to find new ways of generating revenue. Online marketing, digital subscriptions, fees for access to online archives, and joint partnerships with internet-only publications are just some of the ways newspapers are trying to cope with the changes brought on by the internet.
Couldn't they just, increase the prices for advertising in the print version of the newspaper?
If the advertisers are willing to pay for it, sure. I guess that's one way to increase revenue.
Now, answer the question. 1. What is the talk mainly about? Two. According to the professor, what are 2 ways the internet has changed the journalism profession? Three. According to the professor, how can newspaper companies afford to continue practicing investigative journalism? Four. What does the professor imply by discussing coverage of the shooting at Fort Hood? 5. What does the student imply when she says this?
It seems like that's not the only major change. I mean, sure, there's a lot more information out there, and when there's confusion, it's important for people to have journalists they can trust to do fact-checking, find out the important details and reasons for major events. Get the big picture of what's actually going on. But isn't the fact that there's so much more information out there also a big change for the journalists too? I mean, can't they now use information from blogs and social media and chat rooms, things like that, to make their job easier?
Six. What does the professor imply when he says this?
Professor Duke, when you said newspapers are becoming more of the source of in-depth analytical information, how can newspaper companies afford to keep paying for investigative journalism and research and all that when newspaper readership is dropping?
Oh, well, you're right. This is a serious problem. And different newspapers are trying to handle this problem in different ways.
What does the professor imply when he says this?
Oh, well, you're right. This is a serious problem. And different newspapers are trying to handle this problem in different ways.
Now listen to a part of a lecture in a chemistry class.
Good morning. So I know that many of you have questions about the homework assignment due next week, and I want to take a little time today to talk about it first. The assignment covers a technique in chemistry called X-ray crystallography. We've talked about different ways that chemists over the years have used different techniques to figure out attributes of molecules, calculating their molecular weights, for example. But X-ray crystallography is a much more advanced and powerful technique. Your reading will help you grasp the details of how X-ray crystallography works. But let's talk about some of the basics now. What is X-ray crystallography? An easy way to describe it is to compare it to using a microscope. To look at something really small, say a cell in an organism, we use a microscope to magnify it, right? The problem is, if we want to look at something much, much smaller, molecules for example, there's no way we can magnify them enough to see them. But X-ray crystallography allows us to see them, indirectly anyway. Here's how it works. In X-ray crystallography, beams of X-rays are transmitted into a crystalline structure. These X-rays diffract, or bounce off of, the molecules in the crystal. Because the bonds that hold the atoms together in a crystal have a precise structure, these X-rays will diffract in a very specific pattern. A crystallographer measures the angles at which the X-rays bounce off the molecules, as well as the strength or intensity of the diffracted X-rays. From this information, he or she can produce an exact picture of the areas that the electrons in the crystal occupy. Then, the positions of the other subatomic particles in the crystal can be computed, the protons and neutrons. Finally, the angles and types of the chemical bonds, the forces that hold the atoms together in the crystal, and other bits of information can be determined as well. So, as you can imagine, this is a very useful technique. With X-ray crystallography, the exact molecular bond structure of any regular crystal can be determined precisely. It's easiest with crystals formed of fairly small repeating patterns, but it can be applied to larger molecular chains, like those that occur in proteins, provided that they are arranged in a homogeneous crystalline structure. Performing X-ray crystallography on large molecule samples is vastly more complex. First, a series of X-ray diffractions is done, from many different angles. This is used to develop an initial model of the molecular structure of the sample, which is in turn used to determine which angles and wavelengths to use in the next series of X-ray diffractions. This reveals more information, which helps refine the molecular model and so on. Now, back to the homework assignment. The goal of this assignment is for you to apply the concepts of X-ray crystallography to a topic that interests you. I'd like you to design an experiment that uses X-ray crystallography to help answer a question about something you care about. Let me give you an example of something that I would do, to give you an idea. I'm very interested in understanding the evolution of plant and animal species. So let's say, for example, that someone walked into my classroom with a fossil sample of unknown origin and asked me to determine everything that I could about the sample. What kinds of proteins are found in it, whether these proteins could be linked to any known species, current or extinct, and any other relevant information that I could obtain. So how would I use X-ray crystallography? Well, first, I would need to determine whether the sample had any proteins that could be grown into a crystalline structure. This can be determined in several ways, but I'd probably wind up using a device called a mass spectrometer, which can quickly determine the compounds present in a sample. Let's assume that I'm able to confirm, with mass spectroscopy, the presence of a protein that could crystallize. Then I would have to take a sample from the fossil, making sure that the entire sample is a single protein, grow a consistent protein crystal, and use X-ray crystallography to analyze the protein's molecular structure and chemical bonds. Then, I would compare the results with known protein samples that have been classified in a public database, such as the Protein Data Bank. So, you can see that this experiment would require some knowledge of the proteins found in animal and plant species, past and present, right? Now, a quick note about crystalline purity. You should definitely try to come up with a topic that lends itself to analyzing a sample that is known to be, or could be grown into, a pure crystal. But if you're unsure whether that will be the case with the topic you've selected, you'll want to think about how you would develop a specimen that is indeed crystalline, and what you would do if it is not. Or come see me and we can discuss how to tackle the problem.
Now, answer the question. 1. What is the main purpose of this talk? Two. What does the professor imply when he mentions the Protein Data Bank? Three. Why does the professor refer to a mass spectrometer? Four. According to the professor, what is the primary advantage of using X-ray crystallography to analyze crystals? Five. What is an example of a use of X-ray crystallography that the professor gives? Six. Why does the professor say this?
Now, a quick note about crystalline purity.
Alright guys, that was the end of the test. I hope that this went well for you. If you have any questions, if you're not able to find the solutions, reach out to me on my Instagram. follow us over there, for we will be posting many of those solutions right over there as well in our posts and our stories as well. And of course, for more such content, reach out to me anytime. I'm more than happy to create more such videos for you. Let me know in the comments down below how you found this one. And of course, your scores can be calculated through the description. All the answers are over there already.